The side, but oh, there we go. Who knows? I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the excitement of the internet. You never quite know. So, anyway, all right.
Hi and welcome. I'm Jean Casey. I'm director of the Clear Lake Public Library. We're delighted to have this great crowd for this wonderful presentation that Dr. Jonas Westover is going to do today. This is a special year for our library. It's our 125th anniversary. So we can have a great Clear Lake history program like this. I was talking a little bit earlier with a gentleman who's here from a Boston radio station about how important the surf is to nationally, but also to life our community. And it brought to mind that my mother was a lifelong resident of the Mason City area. She lived into her 90s, and she suffered from dementia the last few years of her life. And sometimes I would come and visit her, and I would say, "What are you going to do today, Mom?" And she would say, "Well, I have to have a good nap tonight, because, or a good nap this afternoon, because tonight I'm going to put on my good blue dress and go to the surf and dance." So the surf, the memories of the surf, stay with people all their lives. Dr. Jonas Westover is here, a native of Clear Lake, and a fourth generation of the Westover family in our community. He has a PhD that he got in 2010 from City University of New York, with a specialty in American popular music, and he knows his stuff. He's been published in a number of scholarly journals and is also the top contributor to the Grove Dictionary of American Music, which is the encyclopedia of American music for musical researchers. He has over 400 articles in print there. His areas of study include the history of musical theater, film music, and popular song. He is also an active violinist and conductor working at various colleges in the Twin Cities. And he has a very special project regarding the Surf Ballroom.
Back to Clear Lake. I've actually been to I was born in Clear Lake and have been, I didn't grow up here, but I have been here virtually every Christmas and 4th of July of my entire life. And so I know the town well that way. And this is really an opportunity for me to give back to the one place that, even though I have moved, Clear Lake is really my hometown and always will be no matter what. So first of all, I really want to thank all of you for braving the weather as well to come out. I think we had better weather last year. So definitely had better weather last year, but I appreciate you all spending a little time. What I'm anticipating is the talk is going to be about 45, 50 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for discussion and questions after that. I also would like to let you know that the talk certainly is free. You don't have to pay anything, but I am asking for donations, and what the donations help me do is they actually help me pay researchers to continue doing what I'm calling, what is the chronology. It is the day-to-day events that happened at the Surf, and we at this point have completed about 1950 to 1965 complete. Every single performance, wedding reception, every business meeting, everything. So that is complete. And I am hoping if we can somehow move forward on this, that we will be able to produce a book on the surf in the 50s, specifically, relatively soon. That is the goal. So, but it involves getting grants and all of these things. So, but anything you contribute goes directly to being able to help keep that chronology going and build it more and more and more. So it is my goal in the end to completely do a chronology from 1933 until today. So that is the expectation, is to do a full history. You would be amazed when you go day to day and start to see the little things. Sometimes things fall in the cracks. You've got to make sure, especially for the surf, that you look at the weddings and wedding announcements, at the police reports as well. There are some rather interesting reports there. So. And that's where this material has come from, but also it has come from people donating time and information to me to build this story. And I really depend on people sharing their stories, and that becomes a big part of the fabric of of real history is people's experiences, and that's what I'm excited to include. It's not just the dry things we see in the newspapers, it's what really happened. And that is, especially at a place like the Surf, which we are so lucky that the Surf has been saved. So many of the ballrooms across the United States have been torn down, and we are just so lucky to still have this real gem. Just before I begin, I also want to say that because I worked for the New Grove, Grove Dictionary of American Music, I did sneak something in that I was pleased, since I was the author of the entry on venues. Now, of course, there are thousands and thousands of venues in the United States. It's impossible to give each one of them their full due. So there was one entry that was a significant entry on venues, and the one entry on ballrooms I was able to write about the Surf. So the Surf has made it into a significant place in at least in musicology in our research. So without further ado, I'd like to talk a little bit about, well, maybe quite a bit, about teen bands and teen dances at the Surf. 3 years before the first rock and roll concert was heard at the Surf in 1956, manager Carol Anderson realized how important the choices of teenagers were going to be for the future of the ballroom. In July of '53, teen dances, in quotes, it was specifically teen dances, were introduced, letting teenagers come to the venue as patrons in their own right. Anderson knew that parents would be wary of their children gathering together alone, probably rightly so. So in addition to the 50 cents charge for youth, the adults were encouraged to show up for free. The first dance was played by the Henry Charles Orchestra, a band that regularly played during Saturday nights for adult audiences and sounded a lot like many of the other big bands of the era. In fact, this band would be the one that would provide music for dancing on the night of the Surf's first rock and roll concert, July 26th of '56, alongside Bill Haley and his Comets. Both dates marked an important new direction for the Surf and everyone who attended the ballroom, but the truth was that teenagers, who would become a singled out demographic in many ways during the 1950s, had always been a part of the Surf's history. Many of you are aware of the general history of the Surf. It opened in 1933 under the auspices of Carl Fox and thrived, even hosting a dance the night before the original building burned down in 1947. We actually celebrated the 65th anniversary of the new Surf this summer. A new building, the one that we have now, opened on July 1st, 1948 under new management. During these decades, the Surf was a central location in the community for a wide range of activities, from hosting business meetings and wedding receptions, as I mentioned, featuring both local and national musical acts. With such an important place in the community, the Surf, and so many ballrooms like it across the country, was a place for all family members to attend dances. In my work on the Surf so far, I have heard story after story of children being allowed, and again in quotes, they weren't always there, but to attend shows with their parents after a certain age, usually determined by the parents, but sometimes even without the adults' knowledge. So I've heard some interesting stories of people sneaking around the back of the Surf to listen when they weren't supposed to, or sneaking indoors that they weren't supposed to get into. But children of many ages were present because it was, for many, a family event. The Surf was a safe place to take your kids, and parents knew it. Many people have told me that their parents took them to concerts. One gentleman I spoke to mentioned having seen Spike Jones in the late 1940s. And actually, it was on May 28th, 1946, when Spike and his City Slickers appeared, and this gentleman actually attended with his parents. In the photo printed a few days later in the Globe Gazette, many young people can be seen in the audience. You have to kind of look, but you can see them there. And the gentleman I talked to actually said that the children who were very young were asked to come up right near the stage. And so you can't see them in this picture. This was the first sit-down event at the Surf. And so all these chairs are on the ballroom floor, and these are all the people standing in the backs of the booths. So it was apparently just a crazy and absolutely sold out event, 1946. In some cases, even the performers brought their children along. Shirley Malik Rashi, who is over here joining us, and who is the daughter of Sil Malik, whose Malik accordion band played the surf over 100 times in the 1950s, including the night after the plane crash in 1959. And Shirley tells me, quote, "My mom would go with the bands to the surf jobs, and I, just a little girl, got to go too. Imagine my delight to be on the stage with Daddy. Of course, some of my time was spent sleeping at the back of the stage." Larry Grieco, who is the son of Leo Grieco and the Pioneers, was also a fixture at the surf for decades. And Larry tells me that he remembers many, many times when he accompanied his father to shows. However, there seems to be a moment in every kid's life when they got to go to the surf on their own. Shirley also told me that when she was young, she attended dances with her parents, but when she got her driver's license, her parents let her and her friends go, but only together in groups. My mother, Bonnie Lauber Westover, who is over here as well, was only allowed to go unchaperoned in her sophomore year of high school when she and her date, Mike Bainter, by the way, Mike is over here, but my dad is over here. So, just so you know how things ended up. But they together went to see Stan Kenton perform on November 23rd, 1961. So we know smaller children as well as teenagers were present at some level during the entirety of the big band era, stretching from 1933 opening all the way into the 50s. I recently acquired a photo taken of a group of teenagers being together on Friday, June 7th, 1946. This picture was taken by Warren Photoshop as a, quote, photo memory, end quote. And there are many more of these out there. Here is the cover of this. This also came in blue. So I have one of the blue ones as well, and it's a felt cover. So this is what you get this, and then in the inside, it would have the date stamped, and you would have your picture included. And so here are a bunch of, I guess it got cut off there, here are a bunch of unknown teenagers, at least unknown to me. So maybe somebody will know who somebody here is, but this is 1946, June 7th. And if any of you know of these pictures and would like to share them with the Surf and I, they might be included in one of our upcoming publications. So we'd love to have anything that you've got. The dance this particular night, what they are seeing is Happy Jake. And although I don't know it for sure, it's my guess that this was an old-time band, given that it was on a Friday night, suggesting that many types of music brought young people to the ballroom, not just swing dance at this point, still the old-time too. Here you can see the ad from the week that includes mention of the photo opportunities. So you have your picture taken at the Surf, and here's Happy Jake listed on Friday. So here's the ad from the actual week when those teenagers were there. As the fortunes of middle-class America shifted into the 1950s, a remarkable change happened in the country. The country as a whole was becoming more wealthy, and this meant that goods and services available to families were far greater than they ever had been before. Americans were encouraged to go out and spend a lot. New cars, new appliances, and eventually new televisions became something seen in many middle-class white American homes. The result of this extra income had a profound impact on the youth of the nation too. As households were able to provide more easily for each member of the family, teens began to receive something that would change the face of music forever: allowance. Now, although we take it for granted now, the expectation that money would be provided for entertainment really found its footing, especially for youth, really found its footing in the early to mid-1950s, leading to the development of teens as an economic demographic that could easily be targeted by a wide array of entertainments. Allowance made the choices of teens especially important to the music industry. And the change in the fortunes of teenagers can be demonstrated by the new policy of the Surf in 1953 to hold teen dances. Carol Anderson, the manager at the time, advertised for a dance to be held on July 15th, 1953. Officially endorsed, by the Lions Club. Not here, but it says, "Only teenagers will be allowed on the dance floor," Anderson told the Globe Gazette. The next day, the paper announced that after this had taken place, that a, quote, good-sized, well-behaved group of teenagers attended the first teenage dance at the Surf Ballroom Wednesday evening, suggesting that the event was a success and that more events would be planned specifically for this age group. So, and if you can see down here at the bottom, it says, "Teenagers, this is your night." And it says, "Parents will be guests. We ask them not to dance. Feel free to escort your teenager to and from the dance. No alcoholic beverages to be served or allowed. Properly chaperoned by clubs of your recreational committee." There was a vote actually in several of the clubs, including the Lions Club, to decide whether they were going to support teenage dances or not. And they did decide yes, and it did show up in the newspaper. So teenagers, 50 cents, tax included. Parents, free. Very, very important. So in August of 1954, the management of the Surf came up with something that seems to have been short-lived, but was probably an interesting ploy to get parents, so this is the following year, an interesting ploy to get parents to allow their kids out of their sight. An ad in the Mirror Reporter proclaimed, quote, "Something for mom and dad to do if they bring you to the teenage dance. Arrangements have been made with the Lake Theater for a reduction in price if your theater ticket is purchased at the Surf. See a good movie while your teenagers are being well cared for at the teenage dance." So I guess even though they were free, the kids wanted their parents to go. Kids have been embarrassed by their parents for a long time. So that summer was full of teen dances, and once the tradition began, it continued well into the late 1960s. For the most part, the dances took place during the summer months and were held on either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursdays. Fridays and Saturdays were spoken for. They were the days reserved for adult-oriented shows. The summer months were the best time to bring teens into the ballroom, but once the dances began, the Surf would host teen dances whenever a group could be booked. During the early to mid-50s, the bands that were booked for teens were the same ones booked for their parents. Orchestras led by Don Hoy, Jules Herman. Jules Herman was here all the time. Or Eddie Skeets were the most common. Every once in a while, a doo-wop group or pop group would be featured as well. The Diamonds and the Chordettes were both featured several times during the late 1950s. But after 1956, the teen dances changed radically, and it was all thanks to rock and roll. When the new music burst onto the North Iowa scene, it wasn't necessarily the success of Bill Haley's release of Rock Around the Clock that had brought the music to the teens of the era. In truth, Haley's single didn't really find an audience until the movie Blackboard Jungle hit the theater on Sunday, July 3rd, 1955. And if I back up a little bit, we can see this. Here's the advertisement at the theater. Starts Sunday, July 3rd. A drama of teenage terror, the most talked about picture of 1955, Blackboard Jungle. The song was used in the trailer and in the movie, and once it was released, the single, which had seen minor success before that, it had been out for some time, went through the roof. Here's the trailer for the film, which demonstrates exactly the way rock and roll was first portrayed. How could you not want to listen? It was dangerous and exciting.
When the clock strikes 2, 3, and 4, the band slows down, we'll yell for more. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till broad daylight. We're gonna rock around the clock.
You are now listening to Rock Around the Clock. This is the theme music from MGM's sensational new picture, Blackboard Jungle. Many people said the story could not, must not, dared not be shown. The picture already has the movie and book world gasping. Blackboard Jungle deals with an explosive subject, the teenage terror in the schools. It is the frankest, the toughest, the most realistic film since On the Waterfront. It is fiction, but fiction torn from big city modern savagery. It packs a brass-knuckle punch in its startling revelation of those teenage savages who turned big city schools into a clawing jungle. Blackboard Jungle will be the talk of this town. Don't miss it.
And so when they transition, they give us a score to the background music, the score. It sounds very different from the other music.
Turn off the lights.
Rick.
The lights.
No matter what happens, I love you. I was silly and vain and selfish, so I doubted you. I was like one of the bad kids in your class. Somebody told me a lie, and I believed that lie. But one's as bad as the other.
So I want to tell you something.
I was wrong about something else, too.
Look, you see, this is my classroom, and you're in it. And what I could teach you, first lesson is don't put in.
Don't
Dumb,
butt in, he
because
says.
you just flunk out for good.
How could you not go see the movie? And once the cat was out of the bag, rock and roll took off. The teenagers who were depicted as dangerous in the movie took the music that represented that danger and action and made it their own. And when Bill Haley, along with Henry Charles, played the Surf in June of 1956, those teens were in the audience in abundance. However, despite the dangerous image that continued in films like Peyton Place in '57 and West Side Story, both the musical and the movie in 1959, the majority of teens lived the kind of lives that those who attended the Surf and lived, and rock was for them music that became a part of their lives rather than something that encouraged them, at least one hopes, to be delinquents. The national musical scene was alive and well in Clear Lake during this time. If you were white, successful, and male, chances were that you or your band toured the country playing ballrooms. All the stars played the Surf. Here is a great ad from this one right here from February of 1961 with a great lineup of national groups called a Teens Package in the ad. It says right up here, National Teens Package. We get Bobby V, the Ventures, the Checkers, and we have Jim Franks and Bob Beck from KRIB with records. Parents free, but you can see the price has gone up a little bit from the early days. It's $1.33, so not 50 cents at this point. However, unlike Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash, and the Beach Boys, all of whom played the Surf, the most regular performers of rock music at the Surf were just kids themselves. Usually backed by DJs, just like the famous stars, these local kids came from within a few hours of Clear Lake to play the ballroom. And it was this lineup that could be heard far more frequently than any of the other rock groups. Before I continue, let's actually listen to a little bit of this music, of this local music, or I should say regional music, just to get a sense of how it sounded. Here's a track from Keith Zeller and the Starliners. And here they are. He's Keith Zeller and the Starliners, 1961. So they actually were from Stillwater, Minnesota, and they toured pretty widely. They were here several times. And here's a track of one of their recordings called Carrie May. So, and so Keith is the guitar player, I think, up here. So I've seen a picture of him now. So, but I have to say it's hard to pinpoint which one he is. So he may also be the one over there. So I'm not entirely sure. So Keith, if you're out there, I'm sorry. So, but contact me and let me know. So here is Carrie May. They show us the records first. The sound is not fantastic, so you have to listen carefully. They're pretty good. So, gives you a sense for how that sounded. Actually, the band did survive the whole decade, and there is actually a good site with information about them. One of the most frequent visitors to the Surf was Eddie Randall and the Downbeats. Here's an ad for a performance of theirs in June of 1961, a Coca-Cola dance. The band was based in Waterloo, Iowa, where Randall attended East High School. And he himself started the band as a sophomore in 1956. They started out with 3 performers, guitar, drums, and bass, and went on to add 2 more, piano and another guitar, as they gained popularity. The first show the group played at the Surf was on July 22nd, 1958. Bob Hale, a personality many of you have met, was the DJ that night. The group returned on August 26th of the same year, in 58, and until the group broke up in 1966, they appeared regularly not only at the Surf, but also at many of the other ballrooms throughout the Midwest. They put out a few singles, including one I'll play in a second, a cover of Fool's Paradise, recorded in 1959, a song that had previously been released by both the Cochran Brothers and Buddy Holly and the Crickets. When he was interviewed in 2012 by the Waterloo Courier, Randall recounted a moment that meant a lot to him. Quote, at a 1958 performance at Electric Park in Waterloo, Buddy Holly handed over his guitar to Eddie Randall. Dick Cole, a former Courier photographer and retired from Cole Photography, captured the moment on film. Here's actually the moment, a picture from the moment, with a snippet of Eddie Randall's recording of Fool's Paradise. Oh, you guys have it? So here's Buddy Holly, here's Eddie Randall. So good. I mean, it gives us a good sense for how they sounded. You can hear Buddy Holly must have been an incredible influence in what they were listening to, and how Randall actually did something with his voice to try and match some of the inflections of Buddy Holly. So I can't even imagine being a kid and being in your hometown with your high school surrounding you and getting to have Buddy Holly hand you his guitar on stage while you're playing there. I mean, it must have been one of those moments that they make movies out of, so maybe they should make a movie of it. They were inducted into the Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2000. So one of the events that became a big attraction for teens was a special, quote, end-of-the-year celebration. For New Year's Eve, Carol Anderson always hired a big band to play for adults, so actually on New Year's Eve. The night before was old-time music, frequently either Andy Dahl and his Ridge Riders or Leo Grieco and the Pioneers. But 2 nights before the official end of the year, the teens had their own dance. And it's interesting to see the change over time. In December of 55, it was Jules Herman performing. In 1956, it was Bob White and his orchestra. But by 1957, it was Gene Vincent and his Blue Caps who hit it big with Bebop-A-Luba. And now they were playing the night before New Year's instead of 2 nights before. Here's Vincent singing his hit. So just a little bit, just to remind you of what it sounded like. It's a good video of Gene Vincent.
Well, Bebop-A-Luba, she's my baby. Bebop-A-Luba, don't mean maybe. Bebop-A-Luba, she's my baby. Bebop-A-Luba, don't mean maybe. Bebop-A-Luba, she's my baby.
It's only about 2 months after this performance that these guys were here at the Surf.
In the red blue jeans. She's the queen of all the teens. She's the woman that I know. She's the woman that she's my baby. Bebop-A-Luba, don't mean leave. Bebop-A-Luba, she's
This year, here, let me read back a little bit. Great. This year, 1957, marked the end of teen dances and with teens dancing to big bands. Really, 1957 was the end of that. And by 1958, we actually have an article that appeared in the Globe Gazette the next day. It says 1,000 teenagers at holiday dance. And this article appeared in the Globe Gazette, as I said, and gives a bit more information about how this dance happened and also the plans for teen dances in 58. You can probably not see it terribly well, but it says a crowd of 1,000 teenagers celebrated New Year's Eve a day early at the Surf Ballroom, according to Carol Anderson, manager. Gene Vincent and his Blue Caps presented, I think, yes, 2 45-minute shows, and Dick Coette, KSMN disc jockey, played recordings for dancing. Noisemakers and other favors were distributed shortly before midnight. Coette, who acted as master of ceremonies, announced that he had accepted a position at a Dayton, Ohio radio station. He will be replaced by Gordy Dodge, KSMN disc jockey, at future teenage dances. Until June 1st, teenage dances will be held on Wednesday evenings. The next dance will be June 29th and will tie in with the polio fund drive, Anderson said. And so they frequently had a polio king and queen. And I've frequently thought they probably could have come up with a better name than the polio king and queen, but it was for charity, and so. But not a single teen dance would happen from this point on without rock music as the featured attraction. The disc jockeys had 2 ways of running teen dances. The first was the most common. They brought in a band, played records during the breaks, and gave away prizes. The second, however, was begun in late 1957. This was called a record hop, where no band appeared but recorded music was played for dances. Here's an ad for one of those hops from August of 57. So we can see, actually, Woody Herman is later. And we had the 4 preps were here, and I don't know if you read, but a couple of them were actually in the crew cuts. So here was a performance of theirs at the Surf. They were here in 57. So, but here you can see a little more closely. Here's the teens disc hop. with Dick Coet spinning the top 50 tunes. So an interesting alternative to actually having to pay for a band to be present. So KSMN disc jockey Dick Coet had been very active at the Surf through 1957, but as the article says, his spot was taken over by Gordy Dodge in the early months of '58, and by June, KRIB was given the contract to act as DJs at the Surf. Bob Hale performed the duty first on June 3rd of 1958, and here is the first ad with Bob. Here's the very first one. The new KRIB Coca-Cola Teens Dance, one of your favorites. Bob Hale spinning the top, it looks like 40 or 50, and awarding prizes. But this time they do have a band, Jim Johnson and the Rockabeats. So, and admission you can see is quite a bit cheaper. It's 75 cents, so cheaper than when they had the national groups here. Bob Hale was followed by an interesting individual named Jack Rockefeller. I'm guessing it was a stage name. Jim Franks and Bob Becks, among others. From articles about the dances, it is clear that the DJs were the MCs and hosts for dozens of rock groups, both local and national. I'd love to know more about what these record hops were like, so if anybody remembers one of these, let me know. I'd love to hear a little bit about it. When you line up all the teenage bands that played the Surf, you start to see some interesting groups. A fairly comprehensive list of those between 1956 and 1964 are Jim Johnson and the Rockabeats, Johnny and the Galaxies, the Blue Notes, the Cavaliers, the Ramblers, and we have an ad here with both the Cavaliers and Ramblers playing. So here's the polio benefit with both the Cavaliers and the Ramblers playing. We also have the Rockin' Flames, and here we actually have a picture of the Rockin' Flames. Also the Fabulous Flares, Jerry Page and the Radicals, and the Fendermen, who eventually gained some significant attention and had some high-profile gigs. Denny and the Dynamics, seen here. Here are the Fendermen playing, and let's see. Oh, I guess I missed them around. So let's see. Where did Denny and the Dynamics end up? There they are. And you can see they actually played, and just following this on August 29th, Summer of Stars with Ronnie Cochran. So some interesting groups. Keith Zeller and the Starliners, who we heard earlier. Johnny and the Hurricanes, the Escorts, and the Electrons. Several of these bands are also a part of the Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, coming from all over the state. It seems that the most local of all of the groups from the period between 56 and 64, however, were the Mason City-based Ravons. Although I know there were some Clear Lake performers, such as the mythical Crowbar, who I have heard about my whole life, who appeared in the Lounge in the later 1960s. So I'd love to hear more stories about them. So the Ravons, not to be confused with Bobby Roberts and the Ravons from Illinois, were 5 young men who came together during high school and continued playing, as most of them attended Mason City Junior College. A short article from the Globe-Gazette on January 15, 1964, talks about the new activity of club hopping for teens and young adults in the city. Since less stringent liquor laws were passed in 1963, many new venues needed musicians to entertain guests. This fascinating article explains the need for both professional musicians and local bands, and it also gives a little explanation of the Ravons. And who was in the group and the kind of music they played, both by choice and by demand. I'm going to show you just a little blurb from this article. The Ravons, composed of 3 Mason City Junior College boys plus 1963 grad of the school, are performing as a way of earning their tuition, plus a little extra. This is the article. I'm just going to read part of it. I think it sheds some good light on the situation. Local performers can be procured at a nominal fee, are available short notice and are agreeable to splitting up their week, says the article. One of the combos that appears to be the most popular is the Ravons. This assemblage of young people actually has been around for 4 years, so since 1960. But the new law really opened the gates for them. And then it has this little blurb here about them making a little extra. Background of the Ravons was contained in a recent edition of the Troy Tribune, the weekly mimeographed publication of our valued institution on the South Side. The group had its beginning in 1959 when Russ Rippon and Norm Luker, now college sophomores, began twanging their guitars in unison. Later they were joined by 2 more guitarists and a drummer. The present members of the combo are Rippon on the bass guitar, Luker on lead guitar, drummer Mike Studer, a freshman, and Dave McLaughlin, a recent grad who strums the rhythm guitar and also warbles a bit. A couple years ago, the Ravons made their initial success in rock and roll music. Now, however, they've added quote-unquote commercial music to their repertoire, since that's what the more mature nightclubbers want. Commercial music for those who aren't hep. Are popular standards such as Danny Boy and Summertime. One can only imagine what these kids thought of having to play Danny Boy up along some of their rock music, but you got to do what the public wants. The highlight of the boys' career was meeting and playing with the noted Everly Brothers, Johnny Case and Conway Twitty in their earlier days at the Surf in Clear Lake. McLaughlin does most of the arranging and has written some original pieces, as has Rippon. They hope to record some of their own work. End quote. The band actually did play with the Everly Brothers, and here is the ad to prove it. Here they are. This is an ad from July of 1963, and you can see this, however, it's for teenagers, but young adults 16 and over, the fabulous Everly Brothers and the Ravons for dancing. Now the price has gone up even a little bit more. It's total $1.80. And in fact, they did have a chance later that year to record at least one single with the McLaughlin song Can't Leave Your Baby on it in Minneapolis on Banger Records later that year. I would love to hear any stories about the Ravons if anyone attended their shows or if anybody knows about them, more about them. I'd love to hear any connections that people might have. So please let me know. In most cases, however, the rock groups that came to the Surf were regional bands. They were not necessarily local, but not national either, although that was certainly their goal. Instead, they were Midwest-based regional groups and were placed on a Midwest circuit that was not entirely unlike the circuits for big bands, called territory bands. That's what the traveling Midwestern bands were called at that time. Lawrence Welk's band was one of those originally. And even earlier, vaudeville had a circuit like that too. Tommy Blair, or just Tom Blair, and the West Coasters first played the Surf on June 26, 1962, and was just one example of a group that fit this category. And here they are. This is Tom Blair and the West Coasters from 1961. And so the next year they played the Surf, and this was just one example of a group that was from a different place but traveled this circuit. Blair formed the group from guys both at his high school and from family members, all from around Kansas City. They began playing locally in Kansas and Nebraska, but were given the chance to record at Dot Records and later even Decca. The Tom Drake Agency booked them throughout the Central and Upper Midwest for ballrooms and actually state fairs and county fairs for many years. Blair has some great stories about how complicated things could be with booking and with traveling, but their hard work paid off to a point. They were never able to break through on the national scene, and each one of the members went their separate ways. Blair did give this advice to his son, though, which I think is very interesting. Quote, "Don't go on the road with a band. It's a life of hell." And when my son would ask why, I'd jokingly say, nice places to stay, beautiful country to see, traveling all over the country, different women chasing after you every night, great food, playing music and having fun all the time. It's such a lonely life. End quote. These regional and local groups have been an area of interest for a few aficionados, including the wonderful people at the Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who we have here. and some avid collectors on the internet, but they are almost entirely absent from written histories of rock and roll. The big story of this style of rock, and especially of a subsection, which many of you know, called rockabilly, is that by 1960 the party seemed to be over. Elvis was in the military, Jerry Lee Lewis was shamed after marrying his 14-year-old cousin, the winter dance party participants were dead, and soon after Chuck Berry would be in jail. The story is often told that if not for the British invasion of February 1964, which, by the way, in 7 days, I believe 6 days, was exactly 50 years ago, so rock might have died out. But from what I've seen in the daily performances at the Surf, it may be that while some of the national groups did fall off the scene, though not entirely, these teenage bands kept this music alive and well throughout this period. Even if, like the Ravons, they had to play other types of music to satisfy audiences, they kept rock and roll as a central feature of their repertoire, recording their own songs whenever they could on small labels here in Iowa, or more commonly on labels such as Soma, based in Minneapolis. And don't let it be said that older audiences weren't interested in listening to this music too. Larry Grieco's family, who I met actually this past summer, kept all of his music, and in the arrangements for accordion, trumpet, sax, and drums are copies of his, Leo Grieco's, written arrangements for Rock Around the Clock and Peggy Sue, suggesting that the rock sound found its way to many types of performances. But there's no denying it. By 1953, teenagers started to get the attention of the country, priming the way for a teenage music revolution. And once the beat started, it never stopped. And I'm going to end here with we are very lucky to have some footage of Tom Blair performing with the West Coasters. So the sound is not great. Here is an ad with them at the Surf. By this point, by the way, it was called the Surf of the Four Seasons. It had sort of switched around. That's another story. And here's Tom Blair playing with the West Coasters. You'll have to listen carefully. The sound's not very good. It goes up in a little bit. Nice strong 12-bar blues there on the bottom. Sure you can hear it. Great footage. Thank you very much for coming.
I want to thank Dr. Jonas Westover. His knowledge of the surf and music, American music, is amazing. Thank you for the program today. Thank you for researching and all you're going to do to continue to tell the story of the surf.
Thank you very much.
To sponsor Jonas coming here today. Also, I know I've been at the Surf the last 2 nights. I know how amazing the music has been. So if you're at the Surf and you get a chance to thank any of the Snyder family members, Mom and
Yes.
Dad, Dean and Joanne, the next generation, would not be here, this would not be happening this weekend if it were not for their wonderful generosity and commitment to serve in our community. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a question for you, research Jonas. I was reminiscing with a friend of the surf last night who said they were at the surf the night a man landed on the moon. And that a TV was set up in the corner. People were watching that, but the music was going on, and he thinks it was the band War, W-A.
Oh, yeah, it very well could be.
But
So,
he can't remember for sure. So
well,
when you get to that later 60s, let me know.
okay, I certainly will. I certainly will. Well, thank you. Before you go, there is a basket up here if you want to contribute, that'd be great. But I'd love to answer any questions or comments that you have. If anybody has some stories, I'd love to hear if anybody remembers the Ray-Vons. So that would be really exciting. Any questions? Anything? Yes?
I think I remember all of them, but I can't be sure. I love the teen dances. But when did the first black performers come? Was that, when those other people were getting in trouble, we were really interested in black music.
Right, right. Actually, there were black performers here earlier. Louis Armstrong was certainly here in the 1940s, and Duke Ellington was here quite frequently as well. Black bands, though, rock bands certainly, and doo-wop groups, things like that, they were not a part of this circuit. So, but I did talk to somebody who wanted to remain anonymous, but she said that her father was the doorman when Louis Armstrong was here, and that there were a number of African Americans who were here who wanted to see him perform, and they couldn't go in the surf. They were not allowed in. But the doorman said that Louis Armstrong said, if they're not allowed in, I'm not going to play. And that was actually the moment that changed the policy. Now, of course, that's something that I can't research. It's never going to be in the paper. So you're never going to see that. But the one moment in the 1950s, there was a moment where there was you do have to look at the police blotter. There was a fight, and an African-American man was kicked out in 1959. But that would suggest that he had been let in before then. And so I think it had been an argument of some sort. So I'm not sure the exact date, but I don't think that really changes until much later. So there are certainly black performers here, but groups like we've had here, like the Ronettes, they didn't come to the surf. So the Motown groups, this wasn't a part of that circuit at all. So sometimes it was just about how circuits worked. So yes.
I'm not from Iowa, and I have been curious since I moved to Clear Lake. What was the draw to bring people like Louis Armstrong to this tiny little town in the middle of nowhere?
It was standard practice. It was how the circuits worked. There were ballrooms all over the country, and if you got in the circuit, you went everywhere. Because at that point, especially in the 30s and the 40s, what it was an opportunity for people to actually see you live. They couldn't come into your living room because television wasn't around yet, and so and the stadium performances hadn't begun yet. So there weren't stadiums. Really, the first major stadium performance was actually that night that the Beatles landed and played at Shea Stadium. That's really the beginning of playing for 50,000 people or something like that. And so it was just something that everybody did. It was how you got your name out there. People knew who you were. It was an opportunity for them to see you perform and not just hear you on the radio.
But it was somebody in Clear Lake with the vision of bringing money into this town, because you think a bigger community like Mason City would have grabbed it.
There were ballrooms in every little town. My grandmother grew up in Storm Lake, and the Cobblestone was there. And she said, they would go to they would go to every single town. It would be a circuit. They would hit lots of both small towns and larger towns. They would hit everything. So because these places were everywhere. So I think it must have been absolutely exhausting too. I think these tours were. Took months, and you went everywhere. You went absolutely everywhere. So, but yes.
I just want to add something to that. I'm with the Iowa Rock and Roll Music Association. Iowa is a state had more ballrooms per capita than any other state in the country.
Interesting.
That's why Iowa in particular got a lot of national acts.
Okay.
Because we had more ballrooms than other states.
Ah. Well, thank you. I didn't know that particular figure. So great. If you didn't hear that, Iowa had more ballrooms than any other state per capita than any other state. So yes.
I have a bit of trivia. My wife's parents met at the Surf Ballroom, and they were privileged because they were good dancers to have free admission.
Because they were part of the kids that taught the dancing.
Right.
Nancy was there the night that Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and the Big Bopper played. So, and then I learned later that the field they crashed in was farmed by her dad.
Oh.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well, very interesting. So thank you. I appreciate that. So actually, there were I think it's in 1963 that we start to see dance lessons being taught alongside some of the performers. So I think that might have been when.
This was in the 40s.
Oh, in the 40s. Okay.
You know, they've been married 72 years, so they met. You know, just it was informal. You could get a free ticket if you came early and kind of lined up and.
I see. Good to know. That's the kind of information you're never going to find in a newspaper. So thank you. I really appreciate that. Yes, sir.
I've got a concert poster from Spike Jones at the Surf Ballroom, but I think it was in the 60s or something, 50s.
Oh yeah, he was back here in '56. So
I got 15 copies or so of the actual crash cab report. If anybody wants them, I'll lay them out here, and whoever wants to grab them.
Oh, okay. Sure, I'll put them over here on the table if anybody has an interest in the
research.
the crash report, I guess. So.
Okay, Carl Dawkins Jr., who had a hit, My Heart is an Open Book, said he was here for the first big tour after Buddy had crashed.
Oh, okay. There was I think last time I was here, I actually included a little bit from the Autumn Dance Party. That Jimmy Clanton actually was at the Autumn Dance Party just beforehand, and then there was the Winter Dance Party and a Spring Dance Party. They were these national packages that went from place to place. So, yeah, that very well could have been.
We're
So,
trying to get him to come here, but it's fallen on deaf ears so far.
well, you just got to keep working. There are a lot of great people who have come by. So,
We had our parents. We booked the lounge for their wedding anniversary and had family in. And they had nothing in the big ballroom, and we were able to traverse through that. And the back of the house, back of the stage, where the room, all the signatures and such, was pretty interesting.
yeah, absolutely. The green room, if anybody's ever had a chance when everything's not so active, to check that out. Certainly a very interesting thing. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Talk about the different venues that had different circuits. So did Rockabilly ever come through here much?
Oh, certainly, yeah. I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis was here twice, and you see a few others. One that was here several times actually was Johnny Cash. So it certainly, I found Conway Twitty was here a lot. Actually, I think I found 4 performances by Conway Twitty. So I mean, you know, everything is a little question about what fits in what category. But I think certainly by listening to what some of these kids are doing, they were certainly listening to that music. And so I think actually the largest presence of rockabilly here was through the local and regional bands. So I really think, because clearly Eddie Randall was listening to Buddy Holly very, very carefully. So he's still alive, and I'm trying to find him. So I think he's in California at this point. So but I haven't found him yet. So anyway, any other questions, comments? Yes.
For you so far, what's been the hardest part of putting this book together?
I will tell you one thing that I absolutely never anticipated, and that is that what this has become is an unbelievable can of worms with dozens and dozens of bands, families, musicians who are out there who simply have, you know, they played, and many of them are still playing, and they've just their stories have just disappeared, or are not something that has been discussed on any large level. And so, for instance, when I finally got in contact with Larry Grieco, the son of Leo Grieco, they said, "We're so excited that somebody wants to hear about our dad." And they had very wonderfully kept almost everything. They kept, and one of the things that I found is I found a series of contracts that Carol Anderson signed and Leo Grieco signed, so we can actually see over time how things have changed for that. But that's the hardest thing, is that I'm finding all of these bands and all of these people who really deserve to be remembered and to have their stories commemorated and written down and included in the big the big story of music. And so that's been the hardest thing, is that the scope of this is far greater than I thought. I thought I was just telling the story of a venue, but I'm really telling a much larger story about music that has not found its place prominently in scholarship. So we're really hoping to bring some of that back and have some of these bands remembered. So, yes, sir.
What about the British invasion as far as the surf is concerned?
The British invasion, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. I almost forgot about this. I've shown this before, but it means something different to me now. This is from 1965. This is a poster of Dancing at the Surf, and here are the Yardbirds who were at the Surf. The Yardbirds who would eventually become Led Zeppelin, with James Bond and the Agents plus Roy Haven. But here are the Turtles just before that, and playing with them are the Ravons. So, and Roy Haven as well. So, and you have some interesting things happening here. The Six Fat Dutchmen over here, right next to the Yardbirds. And I think that's an interesting part of this story, that these are the same people playing in this venue. So I also think it's very interesting that in the lounge, in the Surfer Lounge, we have exotic dancer Miss Ilka Martin and others. So, and here, in fact, is the collegiate New Year's Eve party. And this is what eventually happened, is that it wasn't just teen bands anymore. There was a split between teen groups and collegiate groups. There would eventually be a split there. And so we do see some of them come through. But, you know, I haven't covered the later 60s yet. So I'm very curious to see what happens. Now, I know the Surf closed its doors sometimes in the ballroom where only the lounge was open. So eventually I'll learn that story as well, but we're not quite there yet. So.
What about Whoopi John Wilford and his polka band?
Oh, Whoopi John was here many, many times. So, indeed.
How about the men's room, the series of urinals? I've never been in a restroom with that.
I wish I could tell you something about the design of the urinals, but I haven't heard that story yet. So, any other questions? Yes, sir. I'm sorry? Oh, the surf band, the first group that I saw at the Surf. Well, actually, even though I was here many times, it really wasn't until 4 years ago that I finally saw the Surf alive with people in it. It was a big moment. So, yeah, it was recent for me, fairly recent for me. But my grandparents, Glenn and Lucille Westover, were at the Surf every Saturday night for most of their lives. So, well, thank you so much, and I really appreciate your support. So.
You took me up to heaven. You took me in your arms. I was